Hi, my name is Beth Stingline. I am the EL supervisor for Bloomington Public Schools. I'd like to share with you some best practice strategies that Lynn Morales uses in her 8th grade language arts classroom at Valley View Middle School.
One of the most difficult struggles for EL students is the challenge of not only learning the vocabulary that's new to them, but also learning the content, which is new to everyone. And it's a double struggle for them to have to learn both of those at the same time. For students for whom English is their first language, content is difficult in any subject area. So on top of that, you are trying to learn all of the rules of English and the content. That makes it twice as hard for those kids. In my class, they're trying to learn terms that are content specific, characterization, setting, theme. Again, terms that are really difficult if English is your first language. It's difficult for any 8th grader, it's difficult for any age. You have to learn what those words mean, then you have to learn how to apply them, and then you have to learn the vocabulary within applying those terms, and that's really, really difficult for kids to do. And then they have to learn to use them in a different way when they leave my classroom too. So, on the whiteboard, which is adjacent to the smartboard, is the agenda so that the kids can see what we're going to do, and also so they can tell me when I forget something, which I do. And then on the board, I always have visuals that show, if we're talking about an author, maybe have the author's picture up there. When we're talking about characterization, have the pictures of the different characters up there so that we can talk about them, so that I can point to and talk to them about what we're doing. When you're learning vocabulary, it's very helpful to have something to connect the word with, so that in your brain you can make the connection. We give them planner sheets with that are big picture, they're monthly planners. So I have them write down homework, I have them write down upcoming tests, I have them write down field trips, anything that's coming up, so that and then remind them to look at it, because writing it down only helps if you look at it later on. So I have them do that so that they have reminders once they leave my classroom. Before we even present the content, give some background knowledge so that they understand. I guess can I be specific? Like with The Outsiders, we start, which is a story that kids love, but we start with the background knowledge, the time period, the 50s and the 60s, the clothing, the slang, the vocabulary that is unfamiliar to any kid. And again, on top of learning all of the culture and all of that background for the first time, having to learn all those extra terminology and all that vocabulary, that we kind of do that, not just for EL students, for all students, but specifically I'm thinking of the EL students when we do things like that. And we do that with almost any piece of literature that we read. I think building a predictable environment is important for students, especially middle school students. I always say downtime is the enemy of any teacher. It is a killer in middle school, so you have to have things ready to go. And the students have to know, transition time is challenging at any grade level, and it's challenging in any classroom. It's a challenge for me as a teacher too. But if I know what's coming next, and they know what's coming next, and they know we're going to move, and you've got this much time, it just makes things go smoothly. As an adult, it's hard to sit still for a long period of time, so for a 13-year-old, it's going to be hard to sit still. So make sure that you're moving, make sure you're moving between individual activities and group activities or partner activities. If you're reading out loud, not sitting and reading out loud for the entire period, or having them sit and read by themselves for the entire period. I think having them write down assignments or upcoming activities helps build motivation, so that they know that they can plan and that they can be successful. They can decide for themselves, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I am going to remember to bring in my money, bring in my field trip form. And then when they do it, they can feel proud of themselves because they've done it. Yeah. The EL teachers here have talked about and stress is that students need to speak. I always say reading out loud is a skill. Speaking out loud is a skill that everybody needs to have, and it's helpful for EL students to, even no matter how long it takes them to process, to say their answers and use the academic vocabulary. I also have students repeat when things are due. I try to give them as much practice as I can, so that they are using it. So a lot of our assessments in 8th grade language arts are essays. And for a student who is just learning vocabulary or just learning content, that's a near impossible road. So some of the things that we have done to help with that is starting, especially in the beginning of the year, with sentence frames as their essay, and they are filling in the sentence frames. Then we start to take away part of the frames and take away so that they are writing on their own. So that's because essays are a big part and writing is a big part of the 8th grade curriculum. That's one way that we've changed the assessments kind of over the years, and I certainly take zero credit for that. My colleagues and people before me have helped me work that out and understand what's the best way to help EL students be successful, but keep the expectation high that they still have to write and help them understand that eventually the goal is to not have a frame, to write it on their own. One of the things that we do is when anything that we hand out has a learning target. Learning targets are things that are student specific. So it's telling the student, here is the why behind what we're doing. So I usually start my learning targets with I can, and then fill in the blank with what we're doing, so that the students understand that by the end of this exercise or activity, this is what I will be able to do. You try and do your best and be proactive as best you can, but you never know what questions kids are going to have, if something's going to go really well, or it happens, some things are going to fall flat, and then you got to move on, or you got to figure something else out. It happens. I think we're probably all guilty of this as teachers. We talk and we assume students know what we're talking about. And sometimes we catch ourselves and we're able to say, wait, let me back up. Does everybody understand what that means? Sometimes you can tell by the faces of the kids that they aren't necessarily understanding what you're talking about. As I'm reading it out loud to them, I can see faces kind of, because they're understanding the overall message of the poem, but I can see as I'm reading that line, them looking down, or them looking again, or them looking up to see if I'm going to stop. And I didn't, and we went through, and then I went back, and as we were talking about it, then someone asked a question, and then I knew going forward, okay, I have to make sure, not necessarily to stop right in the middle and stop the flow of the reading, but if another student's reading it, to make sure that I ask to make sure everyone understands what a specific term means, or a theme, or an image, or something along those lines. It happens almost all the time with vocabulary, because every kid's at a different level. So if it looks like most of the students, or the majority of the students, are understanding, then you do the one-on-one with the student. You go over, you ask, or you answer their question. If it looks like multiple students are confused, you just reteach it and you address the whole class. It never hurts anybody to learn something twice, or 3 times, or 5 times. And then there's also times when students will simply say, what are you talking about? Or I don't understand, which is the most helpful when students can advocate for themselves and say they don't understand. You can then go back and explain it differently, maybe use different academic language, use a visual, find a visual, and that's kind of what teaching is you kind of do things on the fly, and you have to kind of figure out then, how can I help them understand this a little bit better? Working as a team is definitely better for students. We are a better school community when we all work together and use our strengths, content, language, EL population, and work together. That is what makes our 8th grade team especially, work really well together. In middle school, we have dyads, which would be my 8th grade counterpart. So I teach half of the 8th grade language arts students. She has the other half. Then we are an 8th grade team as a whole, and within our team, so that's all the content areas, we also have an EL co-teacher. She doesn't co-teach in English, she co-teaches in social studies. But she is a definite resource that as I'm working with my dyad partner and we're coming up with strategies and I'm saying, are your students struggling with this? And she'll, and asking the same questions, we can go and ask and get her expertise, because that's her area of expertise, is the EL student. And she can say, here's a strategy you can use. And she sends out, for each student individually, here's the level that they're at. we call them can-dos. Here's a really good thing that, here's where they'll struggle because they're not quite there yet, but here's the things that they can do. Here's how you can build them up. Here's how you can help them. So our EL teachers are a phenomenal resource to fill in the gaps, which are many, with my knowledge of what EL students can and can't do. I like to say I'm tough but fair, and I tell students all the time, I love you, but pull it together, or something along those lines. I am hard on kids, yeah. I consider that having high expectations. It's probably a little easier as an 8th grade teacher for them to understand what is coming is pretty big. They can see, they start high school in 7 months, 8 months from now. So I like to remind them of that, not frighten them, well, maybe a little, but I want to remind them of what you're doing now is going to help you next year, and as you go forward and you start to do things that you enjoy and take classes that you enjoy, you want to be ready. You want to be ready to go. So I try and make them see that what we're doing, regardless of what we're doing, is important. It's the skill. It's the skill of critical thinking. It's not necessarily the specific activity that we're doing. That's something that can help you no matter what you do. It's the skill of coming to class on time. It's the skill of asking questions, advocating for yourself. It doesn't matter if you're in a high school class, if you're in your job, if you're with another group of people. All of those are things that are important and that you want to be good at and you want to be comfortable doing. And so I try and just make sure they understand the importance of what we're doing overall, big picture, rather like global rather than local is kind of what I try and help them understand. Yeah. I hope my efforts as a teacher will just make students know that they can be successful in whatever they do, that they are good people, that they're kind to each other, that they're happy. That's what's most important to me.
These are just some of the best practice strategies that we have found to be successful when working with English language learners. I hope that you find them helpful when you're instructing your students.